The New Testament reading this morning comes from the book of Acts. I'll be reading from chapter 20, verses 32 through 35. This is the Apostle Paul who is speaking. Paul wrote the majority of the book of Acts, and this is later on. I'll explain some other thoughts about Acts as I do our meditation this morning. Reading at verse 32. Now he's speaking to the church at Ephesus, by the way, to the Ephesians. Now I am putting you in the care of God, and the message about his grace, it is able to give you strength, and it will give you the blessings God has for all his holy people. When I was with you, I never wanted anyone's money or fine clothes. You know, I always worked to take care of my own needs and the needs of those who were with me. I showed you in all things that you should work as I did and help the weak. I taught you to remember the words of Jesus. It is more blessed to give than it is to receive. Here ends our New Testament reading. Thanks be to God. Believe it or not, I'm going to stay here this morning. This morning, our first verse from Psalms, a very important truth. If God doesn't build the house, the work of the builders becomes useless. If God is not at the core of whatever work you attempt, whether that be a bus driver, an engineer, a teacher, a cook, an artist, or whether you're retired. Whatever that earthly word retired connotates for you, I can tell you, God does not view you as retired. The work that you will attempt if you go forward will not be enduring. Else, I'd like to tell you about this morning. He was first a Christian, and second, he was a large company. God had pressed upon his heart one question that kept coming up to him over and over again. And the question was this: what difference does being a Christian make in my work? Boom. One more time with feeling. Have you ever stopped to phrase it particularly that way? What difference does being Christian make in your work? Well, he thought about that for a few years, and he then left his very lucrative CEO job and founded the Theology of Work Project. Interesting, huh? The big idea is that Scripture makes clear that work matters to God no matter what your profession or occupation, still working or retired and working from home or working on remodeling your house. God cares about the work today, whatever age you are, that you are doing. The implied there is that you're still working. The question becomes how? So how do we, you and I, approach the work we do? If it matters to God, perhaps we might rethink some of the work that we tell ourselves that we are diligently pursuing or working on. In the book of Acts, we meet Saul of Tarsus, don't we? Now that's earlier in Acts, it's around chapter 9, and we know only Paul as Saul of Tarsus, his birthplace. He was Roman by birth, by the way, but he also grew up being an ardent Jew. You could say in the beginning that Saul was obsessed with his job, couldn't we? He had passion for his work, intelligence, bravery, and above all, focus and determination. Saul's job was to find and capture every Christian man and woman and put them in prison and rid the area of all the believers in the new uprising cult called the Way. Perhaps he looked forward at the completion of his work when he would complete the mission with some large satisfaction of having succeeded stamping out the first early Christians. You see, he had an encounter, though, on the way to work one morning on that road to Damascus. You remember that story. That changed the direction of his work life. Instead of persecuting people, he following Jesus through people that he was persecuting. Instead of that persecution, he took to ardently further the kingdom to stamp out. He helped spread the gospel of Jesus Christ to the known world at that time. Oh. Changed his work. He changed his name and his calling. By the time we meet Paul in Acts 20, he has endured some of the own persecution inflicted on others. He had all years of teaching and leading the church in Ephesus, doing everything he possibly could to build up and spread the work of the gospel. By the time we get to him, as I read this morning in verse 35 of Acts, we hear him tell the elders in Ephesus how he does and did what he does. This, in everything I did, I showed by this kind of heart, we must help the weak, remembering the words of Jesus. It is more blessed to give to others than to receive. Paul's whole being is changed, transformed by God and occupation. Life is now able to be far more beautiful when he works for God than he ever thought possible. even though there was hardship for him along the way. In Chelsea, Michigan, anybody know where Chelsea, Michigan is? Yeah, lots of people. It's met my early career, and it's a beautiful, small. There is an organization in Chelsea, out a little bit away from that city, called Barn Sanctuary. Its founder is a 30-year-old guy named Dan McCarran. He is the founder and the president. And for about 4 or 5 years, Dan has been working at Barn Sanctuary. 6 years ago from that, he was living in Texas and was making, as according to him, a six-figure salary and in a high-tech industry for a very large company. One day his dad called him in Texas and said, "What am I with the family farm?" And Dan says he took maybe 2 minutes on the phone with a pause, and he said, "Dad, I'm coming, and we are going to keep it and turn it into a sanctuary for farm animals." Boom. He quit his six-figure income in the tech industry, moved back to the family farm, which was 5 generations deep in Chelsea, Michigan, to work. He went to all the animal shelters around that he could find to learn everything he could about injured, abused, and neglected animals. And then he went to Michigan State with the vet clinic. As some of you might know, a tough situation with an animal. We had that happen with our one of our dogs. That's the place that the vets all over the state recommend if you really need to get some serious help. So Dan did that, and he started, and he came back home, and he started remodeling the inside of all the barns. It was a large property, and it had lots of fields. His dad also lived in the town of Chelsea, and he saw his son working, and he said, "I can help you." And so he and his dad became a team. He said he hadn't talked very much the last few years because their lives had taken different roads. Hear anything about Paul in there? These connections, gang. Created a 501c3, most of you know what that is, and created the sanctuary. And then his brother came from another state and decided that he wanted to end the business. He didn't know anything about farm animals, and he said he hated chickens and roosters. The first thing his brother did was take him to where they had the chickens and roosters sanctuary and said, "Pick up a chicken." He went around the outside of the gate and he petted him on the other side of the gate. And Dan said, "I guess we have to work on the staff around here." And as far as we know, he's still there helping today. Because he created the 501c3, he said, "We will never just look for grants and government funding. We will do it all through our own foundations and individual people who will support our individual cause. And we will grow as slow as we need to grow, but we want to give back. All right. So here we are. When you start to see more, I can. What I'll do this week is I'll put on I'll give the link if you would like to see. There's videos. It's an amazing, amazing story. And I will put that up so that you can dig a little deeper if you feel renewed by this. We watched on the different Facebook posts and videos that Dan had something different. He wasn't a farmer. He wasn't a tech guru anymore. All he wanted to do was lift up God's creatures and to heal those who needed to be healed. I think there's some hope in the 30-year-old generation and below and up, right, that someone could stand up and do this. It's now 4 or 5 years later, and the sanctuary is funded, and I have to tell you this. This guy is amazing. He has somebody who helps do his CFO, who takes care of the money and makes sure it gets to the right place. And she came up with they needed a car wash brush. Listen to this. You know that when you go through the car wash and the brushes turn around? Okay. Dan thought in the summer, the flies on the cow, let me read the list. Cows, pigs, chickens, roosters, ducks, sheep, goats. I can't find the right. You get it. Everything that is on a farm in terms of animals, there they are. And he said, we need some old car wash brushes, and we need to put them on a pole so that the cows and the horses and the pigs can come up and they can, you know what they do. You can read my body language, Lord, and listen to my lips. And the CFO said, no can do, those are expensive. Wouldn't that a CFO say that? Yeah, of a nonprofit particularly, yes. And so he said, let's have a cow wash. And she said, say what? And they got to go into the town square there, and they had a cow wash. All of the staff and all the volunteers were there, and they did a whole day cow wash, and they got their $2,500, and 4 cow brushes from the car wash were installed on the property. And the first thing he did was he went into the pasture where the cows were, and he sits in the grass. He sits down and he talks to the cows. And he talks to all of them. And he sat down and he just watched. And there's a cow, can you tell I was really interested in this? The cow is called Herman, and he's one of the biggest cows. He's not a bull, but he's a cow. Here, they come over, and the first thing he does is he goes down and he headbutts Dan. And Dan said, it was like, I think a thank you, I think. And he walks right over to this brush that he'd never seen before in their life, that's like 5 foot tall on end, and he goes, moo. The guy cried. Friends, that's compassion, isn't it? Your work, no matter whether you are an electrician, whatever you are, you have to realize that God wants you to have compassion in what you do. By the time we get to verse 35, we hear Paul tell the elders in Ephesus, in everything I did, I showed you that by this kind of hard work, if you haven't thought that farm work was not hard, go think again. We must help the weak. I can't think of a better example to bring to you today than Dan McCarran helping the weak. Remembering the words of Jesus himself said, it is more blessed to give than it is to receive. Paul's whole being changed, transformed by God to this new occupation. Life is far too valuable and more than anyone ever thought possible if you only take the time to see that without God, the workers will fail in their mission. So perhaps God reveals to us that work is throughout our lives, whether it's a volunteer commitment or a paid commitment. See God at work in your work? I would offer you to remember 5 things, Remember this: work is part of God's big picture. He started with creation, didn't he? That was, he called it God's work. He created all things. Our actual work, the work that you do today, tomorrow, next week, the ones you like to do, that work matters to God. To him now, and it will matter to him when you are in eternity. 3, God provides us skills, gifts, and talents, and calls us to a particular role and an activity. Yes, it is a spiritual calling to be a bus driver. It's a spiritual calling to be a cook. It is a spiritual calling to help someone who can't clean their house. We are responsible for the quality of our work. Doing that today, I'll just let it go. It's is it going to make? And also our faithfulness to God in the way we do the work. If you make God a part of that equation of work, it will also, like Paul, transform your life even if you are 92. Last point. Our work is yoked with Christ. We should work as if we are yoked to Christ. You know about yokes? Cows know about yokes. Donkeys know about yokes. A yoke was a constraint that wasn't to abuse or punish animals. A yoke was something that was to help their work here easier. Because when you took the beam or whatever device you were using and you put it around the one ox, you had to let it go across and hook. Think, oh, how awful. Don't think that. Because for the farmer, particularly if you live in Amish country like I do, you see it every day. And what happens is this. I got to come down. Ox 1, ox 2. Here's it. It's kind of like a tie. It's not heavy duty. It's loose. It's got some room in it to move. But here's what happens. Without being linked or yoked, as Jesus said, together like that, here's what happens. I couldn't see. Cow 1. Oh, what happens? cow too, if he's just tied with harness, is like, okay? And so what happens to the field? This is shaking her head. She remembers those. Here's what happens with the yoke, gang. Cow 1, cow 2. Jack, come up here, please. Ox 2. Okay, now you can't touch me.
Oh.
Can't touch this. All right. Okay, here we are. Now, I guess we get a little closer. Okay, so here we have this thing that yokes us together. All right? So go ahead and walk a little slowly forward. Even if I'm not inclined to go, now don't move. What happens? I can only go this far away from him. I've got to step up with them. So we may struggle for a little bit because I might say, hey, I'm going. And he says, I don't want to go. But pretty soon at the end of this yoke, he has got to catch up or he's... Do you see what I'm saying? Okay. Yoking is kind of a cool business. That's why Jesus did that. So then after a while, come on down here, we might as well finish the demonstration. Okay. You can't walk there, you got to go. The cow would never do that, I'm just saying. Okay. So then after kind of keep her position, go ahead, kind of you go and then I'm go. Yeah, okay. And then I'm like, well, yeah, you're not doing that. And we do this. Pretty soon what happens? Remind me to train my liturgist like this next time. Do you see the different thing? Give me a round of applause. This church was founded on the love of Jesus Christ, I'm going to say. I take it that you got the point. That is our demonstration for this morning. So let me take it back and wrap it for you in a nice bow. Finally, our work is centered and should be centered on service to others. Humility and gratitude should be the hallmark of our character. One more time. Humility and gratitude. Don't let them ever go out of fashion. If you center your work with those two things, you will be fulfilling your plan that God has for your life. Important work on earth can only be carried out. He ascended back. We don't have earthly self to go ask how you milk cows. To us, many tasks, one people, every human, ordinary work, serving God. Next, he promised Sabbath rest. Remember that? That's for another day. From our toil. He calls it toil. He calls it labor. Not just more than we expect of ourselves. One more time on that one. He expects more of us than we expect of ourselves. So if you tune in to God, the Father of all creation, and you look at his work ethic, step it up. Knowing that in doing that, we will rest as well. And then, being blessed, we can freely give and freely love and receive all the earthly treasures, those in heaven most importantly. I don't know.